mental. But let's move on. Since we're talking about mental, the next thing on hot and cold is Greg Hardy as a fighter. So we're not talking about anything outside of the cage, or I mean, you kind of can't help it, but um, as a fighter, Greg Hardy was on the co-main event, which I thought was an absolute travesty that he was on the co-main event of UFC on ESPN Plus. And I didn't think it was a travesty because I'm this person that's so against him getting a second shot. I'm not one of those people. Um, I just, the whole point of the rehabilitation process in the country is to basically rehabilitate people so that they can go back out into society and be productive. So I'm not one of those people that's saying, "Oh, you did something horrible, so now you should never ever be able to work again." I'm not one of those people. But doesn't mean I think he's a great guy and I want to go hang out with him. But I'm just saying. But as a fighter, um, I don't think that the ceiling is very high. Um, of course, he's a big, strong, powerful guy who can erase guys with 1, 2 shots. But the problem with picking up MMA so late in your life is that there are core skills that you will never catch up with a person who's been doing it for much longer, because he's already 30 years old, 31 I think, and his footwork in regards to grappling is really bad. Takedowns for a man his size should not be as easy as they are. And I understand he has room to grow, and still working on his craft, but he was not in the octagon with an elite heavyweight at all. At all. Not even close, right? And takedowns were so simple for Alan Crowder. And clearly, after Greg Hardy had done his initial, had his initial burst, his initial adrenaline dump, he slowed down significantly. So, as a fighter, I am definitely cold on Greg Hardy.
I'm actually probably warm, leaning towards hot, but just warm, mostly warm, maybe 80% warm, 20% hot on him as a fighter. Mostly because of what you said. He picked it up so late that I should be seeing CM Punk, right? Whereas when I
No,
see CM Punk, even though CM Punk's clearly not the same level of athlete Greg Hardy was,
that's a big key.
but there's more though. Um, CM Punk, all he had to do was study the fighting. And upon studying and putting himself totally out there and going in, I didn't see anything that indicated I ever wanted to see him fight again. I'm grading these guys as what they are, a guy picking it up really late. Is there a spark of something? I wholly agree with Dana White. This guy's a fighter. Is he going to be heavyweight champion? I'm not grading somebody who just picked up the sport on that scale. My first thing is, can you be a legitimate professional heavyweight? I do think he can be that, particularly because he was so heavy coming into this. Like, the fact that he even got down to where he got down to is an accomplishment in and of itself. And knowing that his conditioning is only going to go up, like, he clearly has the discipline to learn. And even though he's obviously not a wrestler, it looks like he has the foundation to become skilled in takedown defense. The way he didn't panic, he wasn't moving in that way. Like,
Mm-mm.
I saw him very flawed, but I saw the potential. And when it came to punching, his punches looked accurate. He punched really hard. I did not expect a lot out of him. I don't think we got necessarily a lot, but I think we got a lot of signs. And I think the signs are good. I think Greg Hardy's camp has every reason to say, let's train our butts off for between 9 months to 2 years. Take another really soft opponent and start building something and see if we can get you to be pretty sharp by the time you're 33, 34 years old. And and that's the last thing I'll say is, as a heavyweight, heavyweight isn't as young of a man's game as the
No,
other weight
it's not.
divisions.
That's
So
no,
I
that's
so
true.
his age isn't as much of a factor to me. So when I look at him on like a 10-year window for this, I say, heavyweights fight into their 40s. Okay, cool. So do you have what it takes to become a fighter in the next 3 years to start a legit MMA career? Yeah, I think he does. But he's got a lot of
I
work to do. He's got a lot of work to do.
he's got a lot of work to do. And here's the thing: there's a lot of beatings to be had, to be taken in that time, because you if you're fighting in the UFC, everybody you're fighting is that guy. Everybody is. So because I am not 100% sure that Alan Crowder doesn't win that fight if Greg Hardy doesn't illegally knee him in the head, because Hardy had already dumped the energy. He had slowed down significantly, and Crowder was gaining confidence. He was coming forward, and if he had taken ground top position again, I think that he would have probably finished Hardy. And the problem of it is that while you're learning, you're losing. And I don't think the CM Punk thing is a good comparison, because there's so many differences. First of all, Punk's a smaller man, and when you're smaller, you don't have the big size mass presence in terms of power and that sort of thing to lean on. Because where Greg Hardy is lacking in technique, he's able to compensate for that with size and power. Punk didn't have that. Also, Punk's 10 years older than Greg Hardy. That's another major factor. And also, Hardy had amateur fights. Punk hadn't had any amateur fights. So there's several differences there that don't make that a good comparison at all. Um, the other thing is Hardy is a legitimate athlete. They played a professional sport at the highest level. CM Punk's not a legitimate athlete. He was a performer, not an athlete. So, and not saying that no professional wrestlers are good athletes. Some of them are. Punk's just not one of them. So, that to me changes it. But I don't. I'm not. I mean, can he knock a couple guys? Can he knock a guy or so out? Maybe. But I think that fighters watch, man, and they saw what happened with Alan Crowder. The next guy that he gets is going to say, "All right, I got to weather it. I got to weather that initial onslaught. I got to weather it." But
It's
ultimately, what's going to happen is he's going to slow down, and when he slows down, I'm going to take him down. And the next guy he fights might be even better at the ground game, unless Dana White strategically puts him in there with a brawler so that he can look good,
well, I
which
think I think
doesn't help him.
I think he has to strategically set up his fights so that he doesn't get false started as a career. Like, you can't put him in against people that just counter him before he develops those skills this early on. But it's actually because of all of those differences that you mentioned that I think his ceiling is higher. Why I wouldn't write him
Oh, it's
off?
much higher. It's definitely higher.
That was my entire point. Like, you basically made my point for me, which is if he was in a CM Punk situation where he was
No,
older,
you were
where
saying
he
you said you were expecting to see what you saw from CM
no,
Punk.
that's not. It's not what I was expecting. It's where I'm drawing the basement. You know what I'm
But I
saying?
don't
I'm
think it's
saying
even
I'm expecting
comparable
that's a
at
possible.
all.
From a skill standpoint, I do think it could happen because there's no reason. Like, from a future standpoint, I didn't think CM Punk had a future. However, I could at least see him show up and say, "Hey, you know what? For a guy who had no chance, you looked okay." But he didn't look okay. He looked really, really bad. It reminded me to a degree of when Tony got in the ring against Randy Couture. He just grabbed his ankle and turned him upside down like Spider-Man. And with Hardy, I didn't think it was that bad from a skills standpoint. Now, physically, there's no comparison at all, which is the entire point. Is I think Hardy, if you look at the fact that as an NFL player, the mindset, the training that he has access to, just mentally as a person, puts a higher ceiling on it for reasonable doubt to say, will his conditioning get much better? Probably. He hasn't been conditioning for this sport for a long time, and being what they say he was at 285 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, he's gonna have to cut down that much all the time. I don't care what happens. He's a large guy, and if you look at the size of his legs, he's going to have to cut. There are plenty of heavyweights who always have to cut to get to 265. because
Yeah, but
they're just
I
big
don't
guys.
think. But I think there's a difference when you don't live your life preparing for a specific thing. Like he lived his life preparing to be a football player, and now in a reasonably short time span, he's now being an MMA guy. I'm talking about what happens if 2 years preparing your body to be an MMA fighter. I think he'll look differently than he did today.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, not today, but
I'm not saying that
2
he
years ago.
won't improve at all. I'm just saying that I don't think that he has enough time to improve as much as he needs to improve because he's already in the UFC. He's already in the UFC. Now, if he was still fighting regional guys and stuff like that, it might be totally different because he'd be able to they'd be able to control the competition more. But by fighting in the UFC, there's a certain level of competition that he's going to face on a regular basis, and he's going to get exposed. And exposure in MMA leads to being knocked out, and it leads to being pounded out and finished and submitted and injuries and all of these different types of things. And you factor all that in, I'm like I said, I'm cold on him as a fighter. I just don't see it. And then you can't minimize the mental stress and the impact of being Greg Hardy. Being Greg Hardy is not easy. It's obviously of his own doing, but being Greg Hardy is not easy.
That's
Eh,
part of the reason that I actually would say, like you saw his interviews, right?
yeah,
He's a really smart guy. Like he's a really smart, well spoken. Like if you look at his interview with Ariel,
yeah,
he outdueled Ariel in that interview and just took the high ground. And I don't mean moral high ground. I mean like debate, discussion high ground
yeah,
consistently without being aggressive. That's really not something. That's not a social skill a lot of people have. I know his past has a lot of bad things in it, which is almost scary because the guy that you saw talking, I
yes,
don't, you know what I'm saying, didn't seem like
like that guy.
right, which is scary. So
That's scary.
the fact that he's that, I do think he's an intelligent guy.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't think he's a I don't think he's a dummy. I think he probably lacks self-control in certain situations, but he's clearly not a dumb guy, clearly.
yeah. So I think that anybody who is as successful as a football player as him, who turns their full attention towards MMA, who has the intelligence and a good camp and the physical tools still. And I think he is still young enough to have the physical tools. And he's in the division where he doesn't have to be good right away in terms of, the lighter you are, kind of the more speed is a factor. And the stronger you are, I mean, the heavier you are, the more strength is a factor. And strength doesn't go away with older age as speed does. So if his camp is smart and if Dana is smart, I do see a way that he could become a UFC fighter. I'm not thinking of him in terms of being a champion or fighting elite other people. I'm just talking about being a guy on a card, being a guy that people enjoy watch fighting, being a guy that you would say is a solid fighter, right? Um, can he do that? I would say I'm warm on him being able to do that, which is why I say warm.
Yeah, I would like to see him in there with the Kraken next. Juan, I'm forgetting. God, I'm forgetting this kid's name. Juan Adams. Juan Adams. He also just came from Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. He just had his UFC debut as well. He's only 5-0. He's 27 years old. He's a massive guy, doesn't have everything isn't 100% down from a technical standpoint, but he's a big, strong, massive dude. And I think that's a fight that makes sense. I don't know. I don't know if that's what I don't know if that's what Dana will want for Greg Hardy because he seems to have adopted him as his project, but we'll see what happens. But all right, that was way more than that probably
Ooh,
should
that
have been
was
a
too late.
singular.
Yeah, we knew that should have been a segment.
That should have been a segment, but so we apologize. So
Pocket, I'll be weak. I'm rather unique.